In today's video, we explore a terraced house through time, covering 150 years of fascinating social history. Welcome to another episode of Through Lucy's Lens, where today I'm back here at St Fagans in Cardiff, where I'm going to show you my very favourite exhibit, the terraced houses through time. Let's go. The terrace cottages at St Fagans originally stood at Rhyd-y-car Terrace in Merthyr Tydfil. That's in South Wales. It was built around 1795 by the ironmaster Richard Crawshay, and he built them to house his iron workers. By 1850, the iron boom was past its peak, and coal mining was beginning to replace it as the largest employer in the area. Originally, there were 2 terraces of houses at Rhyd-y-car, with 29 houses. They create an amazing immersive display of houses through time, and it's honestly one of the best exhibits of this kind I've had the privilege to visit. The cottages are displayed as they may have looked in 1805, 1855, 1895, 1925, 1955 and finally 1985. And you can enter each one, soak up the atmosphere and appreciate the environment where these hard-working people lived under sometimes difficult conditions. The first cottage we're going to enter is based in 1805, and for context, George III was on the throne and the Napoleonic Wars were raging, with the Battle of Trafalgar taking place on October the 21st of this year. Here in this terrace, a young family moved from West Wales to work in the iron ore mine. Iron workers at the time were kind of the top of the working class. They were considered to be quite well paid. So the houses had to be good enough to attract workers to come and work in the iron mine. And in 1805, these little cottages were considered the creme de la creme for housing for the working classes. Each house contains a living room with a small bedroom above. Sadly, the upstairs in the terraces is not accessible, but it's a small room accessed by a curved staircase where the children might have slept, and the space could also be used for storage. At the back of the house is a small pantry where cooking equipment and food were kept, and there's also the main bedroom. These houses were better than the farm cottages that this family was used to living in. The lack of fresh air and no toilets would have been nothing new to them. One of the things that strikes you immediately about these cottages is their size. They're tiny and almost feel like dolls' houses in their proportion. It's hard to imagine such big families living in this space. The handmade oak furniture in the cottage comes from West Wales, and it would have been given to this young couple as a wedding present, and it was furniture for life. You can see this reflected in the next cottages. The fire in the cottage was used for cooking, heating water and drying clothes. Food would be cooked on a pot above the fire, and most of the baking would have been done on a bake stone. This is a flat piece of iron to the left of the fire. In 1805, working class people used wooden bowls, plates and spoons to prepare and eat their food. In 1805, there was no toilets or running water. There were no sanitary facilities here at all. Water would be collected from the nearby river, and the toilet would be a pot, emptied every morning. Next we move into 1855. Queen Victoria is on the throne and the Industrial Revolution is in full force across the United Kingdom and here in Wales. By 1855, Merthyr Tydfil was overcrowded. There was a lack of toilets and no piped water, and this led to outbreaks of cholera in 1849 and 1854. 6 residents from this terrace died in the cholera outbreaks during that time. A newspaper article about Merthyr in 1849 commented how the streets were in a state of disgusting filth. To prevent further outbreaks, a communal water pump was added to the terrace. In 1855, this cottage was the home to Margaret Rosser. She was a widow and she lived there with her children. Her husband William had been an iron miner, but her 19-year-old son who lived here now was working as a coal miner. This shows the generational change of trade from iron to coal mining in the area. By 1855, people had ditched the wooden bowls and they were using pewter and china rather than wooden plates. Despite the poor state of the streets in Merthyr Tydfil, the residents were really proud of their homes and went to a lot of effort to keep the houses clean and tidy. They used decorations such as china ornaments and paintings to add a personal touch to their homes where they could afford it. The fireplace in the cottages now had a small oven, but the bake stone was still used for baking. Meat was roasted by hanging it from a clockwork spit in front of the fire. In 1851, a large communal oven was built at the end of each terrace and could be used for any of the householders for baking their bread. During this time, Christianity played a big part in most people's lives. There's plates decorated in the cottage with phrases from the Bible such as "Thou God seest me" and "God is love." These reflect the strong religious beliefs of the people who lived here. Moving forward to 1895, Queen Victoria is still hanging on, but by 1895 these cottages were out of date and they were cramped. According to the 1891 census, 14 of the 26 houses had 5 or more occupants. This was the home of William Richards. He was from Pembrokeshire. He was working as a railway signalman. Railways were of course very important to the Industrial Revolution and the coal industry as a whole, and Rhyd-y-car was now surrounded by railways. The fireplace was still used for cooking food, heating water, drying clothes and bathing in front of. Hanging to the left of the fireplace is a bed warmer. This metal pan would be filled with river stones heated by the fire and then placed under the covers of the bed to warm it up. The cottages now had sliding sash windows so they could let in fresh air without having to open the front door. And by 1855, light would be provided by an oil lamp. Candles were still used, but oil lamps were safer and provided more light. The textiles in this house give it a cosy but cluttered appearance, typical of the Victorian period. The wooden benches now have cushions for comfort, and the table legs are protected from knocks and scratches by the material covering them. Furniture became more affordable because of mass production, and this is shown in items such as the decorated sideboard in the cottage. They would have been sold at quite affordable prices in the local shops in Merthyr. In 1855, there was still no toilet facilities on the terrace, but finally in 1895, toilet facilities were installed in the gardens with one toilet shared between 2 households. Moving right forward to 1925. George V is now on the throne, and the slow economic recovery after World War I trudged on, with many in industrial areas experiencing a recession and great hardship. I found it really interesting to learn that in 1925, the best furniture in the house was placed near the open door. This was seen as the best side, and this meant people walking past the house could admire the nice things that people had on display in their home. By 1925, the walls in the main room were covered in wallpaper rather than painted. The fireplace was still used for cooking, but the house finally had running water, so they no longer had to go to the communal water pump to collect it. The toilet, however, was still outside. By 1925, photography had become cheaper and affordable. So photographs were common in working class houses and were used to decorate the walls. There are framed photographs in memorandum to a soldier who died in World War One. Around 32,000 men from Wales died in the First World War. Families all over Wales would have displayed personal memorials like this to a lost and loved relative. In this cottage, there's also a coffin drop. This is a removable beam in the ceiling and floorboards. It just means that large pieces of furniture could be taken upstairs, and you could also bring dead bodies down. Without the coffin drop, this just isn't possible, as the staircase is too narrow and too steep. It's time to get back in our time machine, and we are heading to 1955. It won't be a surprise for you to hear that this was one of my favourite cottages. The cottages were condemned by the local authority in 1935, but the families who lived here continued to dig their heels in, and they stayed there right until the late 1970s. By 1955, some improvements had been made, such as retiling the roof and adding an electricity supply. The back of the house was now a kitchenette and child's room, and the main bedroom was upstairs. Most people living here still worked in the coal mines, but the number of people working in factories nearby was increasing. It wasn't common for houses in Wales to have electricity until way after the Second World War. But by 1955, these cottages had electricity, and the rooms were lit by single bulbs hanging from the ceiling. Even though the fireplace here dates from 1795, it's no longer used for cooking, but it's used to heat the house on cold days. The most wonderful part of this home is the living shed. Living sheds were built in the gardens in the houses, as the house itself was very small, and they were used as an extra living area. They were used in the daytime as a living and work room, and it provided extra room to carry out housework such as food preparation, cooking and washing. Behind the living shed is a toilet and an Anderson air raid shelter. During the Second World War, the Anderson shelters were put up in gardens throughout South Wales, and later they were reused as garden sheds. Washing by hand was still common, and it was still not very different to how it would have been done 150 years earlier in the 1805 house. For poorer families without a washing machine, washing was a constant chore, particularly in the cold and damp weather. In 1979, the last residents left Rhyd-y-car after a tragic flood saw the lives of 2 of the residents lost. In the 1980s, most of the terraces were demolished, but these 6 were offered to St Fagans Museum. By 1985, many people in the area had lost their jobs due to the closing of coal mines and local factories. The terrace at the end was decorated to reflect the times when the terraces were open to the public at St Fagans. There were, and there still are, thousands of cottages like this lived in Wales. This last house was really reminiscent for me. I'm a child of the 80s, and it took me right back to my family who lived in Wales and lived in very similar homes. It was actually quite emotional, and I think most of the people watching this video will have stood in a room not decorated very differently to this, even if it was bigger or smaller or a different shape. The fireplace is typical of a 1980s terraced house, and it represents the trend at the time for removing original features and replacing them with more modern alternatives. I find this ironic now, as many homeowners are now desperately trying to put back all the original features that had been torn out. The back of the house has been converted from a kitchenette and bedroom into a kitchen. It's been fitted out with all the modcon appliances you could see that I remember seeing gleaming out of the pages of the Argos catalogue. The house has plumbing and hot water, so there's no need to heat water on the fire. One of the quirkiest features of this house is because the house is still so tiny, there was no room to add a bathroom. The toilet, even in the 1980s, is still outside. A bath has been added to the kitchen instead of adding a bathroom to the house. The bath has a wooden cover which can be used as a table when the bath is not in use. This would have made a really nice change from having to wash in a tin bath in front of the fire. I'm absolutely desperate to hear if any of you have lived in or been in a house with a bath in the kitchen like this. In my grandparents' house, the bathroom was very, very close to the kitchen, but the bath definitely wasn't in the kitchen itself. That's the closest I've ever been. So as usual, please let me know in the comments. As always, thank you so much for coming with me on this journey through time. This is such an incredible exhibit for really showing you how things were, how things are, and how the same building can be part of a 150-year story. I absolutely loved it. As always, let me know in the comments which one was your favourite. I personally have a soft spot for the 50s and the 80s one, but I think that's because you just connect on a human level with things that spark your own memories. But it's also great to see how things were so long ago too. Until next week, I will see you again then. And if you're new to the channel, I've now got 60 plus videos of different social history locations across the UK, and it would be great for you to join our amazing community of social history lovers here on YouTube.